Welcome back to the classroom. Today we're continuing our program, A Moment for Life, where we break down the pro-life argument into smaller segments so that we can better understand, better articulate, and better defend our pro-life position. Today we're going to look at the differences between the born and the unborn, and we're going to see that there is no essential difference between them that can be used to justify the killing. Looking back at our pro-life syllogism, we established that it was wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being, that elective abortion intentionally kills an innocent human being, and therefore elective abortion is wrong. After we establish this syllogism, we'll usually get some kind of pushback from the pro-choice advocate that's going to seek to identify some difference between the born and the unborn, and they are going to use that difference to justify their pro-choice position. Stephen Schwartz puts it well when he says there are only 4 categories of differences between the born and the unborn. Differences of size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency are all that separates the unborn from a more mature adult, and none of those differences are sufficient to justify abortion. Let's take a look at the differences in size. Yes, the embryos are a different size than full-grown adults. They're smaller, but why does that matter? Women are generally smaller than men, and newborns are definitely smaller than full-grown adults. Why does size matter? If size mattered, then logic would require that bigger human beings have more value than smaller human beings. This is certainly an absurd conclusion. What's more, if size is the determining factor and size comes in degrees, then what's the necessary size to establish humanity? What size does a human being have to be before they mattered? And who gets to decide that? This is an arbitrary and indefensible position to take. Even Dr. Seuss knew this when he said, "A person is a person, no matter how small." If development is what matters, we need to notice that we develop and continue to develop throughout our entire lives. From conception until death, a human being continues to develop. And if level of development is the criteria by which we judge human value, what level is enough and who gets to decide that? This again is an arbitrary and indefensible position to take. What about environment? Yes, the unborn live in a different place than the born lives. The unborn lives inside the womb, but why does that matter? Since when does where you are dictate what you are? Birth is not a transformational occurrence. It is merely an event in the life of a human being. It is just an event like a wedding or a graduation. Birth does not take an entity that before birth is not human and transforms it into something that's human. If birth is what makes human beings human, then what about fetal surgeries? Take the example of Lynn Hope, who at 23 weeks gestation was removed from her mother's uterus. A surgery was performed to remove a tumor, and Lynn was then placed back into her mother to continue to develop and was born later on. Did Lynn go from a being with no moral value before the surgery to briefly being a moral, valuable human being during the surgery because she's outside the womb, and then when she's placed back inside the womb, does she go back to being a non-human again? This is absolutely absurd. Birth cannot be what dictates our humanity. What about degree of dependency? Yes, an embryo is dependent on her mother for food and shelter, but why does that matter? All human beings need food and shelter. What it comes down to is this. Newborns are helpless, but we give them moral value. We say that it's wrong to kill a newborn out of choice. But what about a human being who's even more helpless? Why do we hold that helplessness against them? The unborn is a human being at its most helpless state. Our law and our moral intuition usually goes the other way. When a crime is committed against someone, that crime is generally seen as worse if the victim is a helpless individual. And the more helpless that individual is, whether it's a disabled person or a young child or the very elderly, the more helpless that individual is, the more atrocious the crime and the greater the penalty. Why do we not apply that to the most helpless among us, those human beings who are still in the womb? It doesn't make any sense. If degree of dependency is what separates a human being with moral value from a human being without moral value, then that just proves too much. Because what it does is it takes human beings who have been born and puts them in the non-moral category. In other words, those human beings who are dependent on medicine or machines or some other artificial way to support themselves and to support their existence, those human beings would be deemed to be non-human and could be killed under the same justification as abortion. Quite simply, establishing humanity based on a degree of dependency is nothing more than a powerful group exerting its power against a powerless group. It's a powerful group exerting power against the powerless. This is a crime against humanity. It is not what compassionate human beings do. The bottom line in all of this is that there is no essential difference between the born and the unborn that would justify abortion. Think SLED, S-L-E-D, size, level of development, environment, and degree of dependency. None of those differences can be used to justify killing an embryo at the earliest stage of development. And keep the burden of proof on them. You've established a syllogism that it's wrong to intentionally kill an innocent human being. Elective abortion does that, and therefore elective abortion is wrong. When they come back at you with some difference, the burden of proof is on them to show why that difference matters. Make sure they carry that burden. If you force them to do it, it will be clear they can't do it. There is no essential difference between the born and the unborn that justifies abortion. As always, speak graciously but truthfully, every time, everywhere. I'll see you next time in the classroom. Thanks for watching and for taking a moment for life.